Professor Margaret Rogers Van Coops, and you're listening to my show, The Truth. When I talk about telling people the truth, I always say don't hold things back, because if you hide it, then things get worse and worse. You know, people start digging into whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing, and try to reveal something and make you out to be something else. So here I'm going to talk about me and my life to give you an example of how I had to really hide a lot of things that were happening to me as a child. So here's the first one. I couldn't have been more than about 2.5. I had a very astute awareness. I had out-of-body experiences where I literally was watching a storm, came out of body, went into the oneness, found myself as a child sucking my thumb, standing on the edge of a green area when I looked up and there was a very, very tall black man standing next to me. And as I looked up at him, I knew who he was. And then we walked over in the clearing towards some Creoles, which I didn't know the name of as a child, and went inside, where I sat down and became a man and listened to him for what I thought was 3 days, while he was telling me all the things that I should know that I was going to do. Well, then he said to me after a while, time's up, we better take you back to the edge of the forest, which he did. And as I stood there looking at him, he said, now remember everything I've told you. And at that point, I found myself being a child again. And then the next thing I knew, I was waking up on my mother's bed and running out to my mother, because I thought I'd been missing 3 days. Went into my mother and apologized profusely for being gone for 3 days. And she said, Margaret, you've been asleep for all of 5 minutes. No, I was with this dark black man. And he told me ABC, whatever it was I told her. Apparently, she looked at me and she said, oh, you were dreaming, darling, and then rationalized it away. But years later, in my teenage years, when I brought it up again and told her about it, she then remembered, and she said, you know, I never could understand why you could tell me that you were talking with a black man when you had lived in a white city with no black people around and never seen a black person at that time in your life. I was confused, and I admit it, but I didn't know what to say, and I still don't know what to say, so let's not talk about it. And that was so typical of my mother. If something didn't make sense to her religion, we were Church of England and Sunday school and matinee and evensong, all these things, Christmas carols, I loved it. All these things were things I was used to. So for me to say that I'd been out of body and in another place for a length of time, not as a child but as an adult, was just outside the world for her. She couldn't handle it. My next experience as a child was playing with a little boy who had this blonde hair and a blue robe on. In England we called it a dressing gown. And I ran into my mother and said, where's my friend gone? And she said, what do you mean, where's your friend? You haven't got a friend. I said, yes, I have. I was playing with him in the hall and he's gone. And she said, well, what's he look like? So I described him as this little blonde boy with a blue dressing gown. And she immediately said, oh, well, it must have been imagination. Don't worry about it. If he's nice, maybe he'll come back. And she made light of it. Years later, when I talked to her about that, she said, oh, that was interesting, because I've woken up at night to see this little boy standing at the foot of the bed too. Well, as I got a little older, I started to realize that little blue person in the blue dressing gown was not a boy. He was a grey. And I went on to learn, because of my many encounters with the greys, that there were different sizes of greys. So the miniature greys are what we might call today dwarfs. And they lived upon this earth a very long time ago and had what we now call magical wands and things. But what they actually had was the ability to transform themselves from point A to point B by pressing something and moving somewhere. I'll tell you more about that in a while. So I didn't know much more than that at that child age, so I just put it to the back of my mind and carried on. In my book, My Journey into the Oneness, I do talk about my alien experiences, so you might like to get hold of a copy of that and read it. But here I'm not promoting the book, I'm talking about my experiences with aliens. So at that point, my next sort of big encounter was when I was about 4.5, because my mother had literally birthed my sister, so that was a marker in my life, when I heard the voice of God in the hallway telling me that I was a child of God and I would know great suffering, and I would help all those who are suffering. And my mother was a suffering cripple, so I kind of knew what he was talking about. And that again is in my book. But what happened that I didn't write in the book is that within 2 days of that or so, I was in my bedroom, and because my mother and father were sleeping with the baby, and there was a lot of noise going on, so I thought. And I got out of bed to see if it was my parents, and they were sound asleep, and I couldn't make up my mind where the noise was coming from. And I was quite scared, as I will say. So I went back to bed, and then I felt there was someone in my room. And I remember the next thing was that I was drifting out the window, 3 floors up from the ground floor, up towards a spaceship, looking up at it, and going in there. And there were these very, very tall aliens who were like giants to me, because I'm a child. I'm still a child. And they're checking me. They're looking at all my digestive system and my nervous system and so on. And I'm asking them, what are you doing? And they're telling me why they're doing it, because they want to make sure that I'm going to stay strong and healthy. And they're checking me out. And to always remember that when I come to them, it is for a checkout and nothing else. And as I was leaving them, there was one woman who came in who was also very tall, like the doctor that was checking me. And there was something about her, and I didn't like her, and I felt she was austere in some way. That's not a child word I would have used in those days, but stern or angry looking. And as he said to me it was time to leave, he said, remember, you are one of us. You are an Arcturian. I didn't even know what an Arcturian was, but somehow I remembered it. So the next thing I know, I wake up in bed, and I'm lying there, and I said to my mother a day or so later, whenever a child remembers, what is an Arcturian? And she said, it's a star. And I said, well, what's an Arcturian? She said, no, you got the word wrong, it's Arcturia or something, you know. And I didn't really know it, and I forgot all about it for a while. I got older, and I was sitting in the park crying. Again, it's in my storybook, but I'm not telling you all the things that were built up to it, parents arguing period. And I'm crying, and quite suddenly there's a woman sitting on the seat next to me. I didn't hear her walk up, I didn't hear her do anything, I didn't feel her sit down. Her hand touched my hand. I looked at her, and because I've been crying in my hands and so on. She went on to talk to me for over half an hour, if not more, I don't know how long it really was, telling me how the world is and how we have to understand that there are light and dark things happening on this planet, such as the war we've just gone through, and I understood that, and telling me how many people were emotionally, mentally, physically strained and worried and anxious and so on. And I remember looking at her as she's talking to me, and she's very sweet, her hair's up in a little bun, and she couldn't be more than about 4'3" or 4 or 5. My mother was short, so she was just under 5 foot, so I was not surprised to see a shorter person than me. And at that point, she said, you better run along because your mum and dad will be worrying where you are. And I literally got up off the chair and walked 3 or 4 paces at most to turn around and thank her, and she was not there. And then I walked back because I thought, where's she gone? Because there was nowhere to go. The pathway was sealed off by fences, and the only other place that was available was a garden area that I looked at, and she was not there. And as I walked back towards the street, I heard a voice say, "You have just met your first Arcturian." And that was the time that I realized I'd heard that word so long ago. And of course, now I know that the Arcturian that I was on the ship with, who was so ginormously big, made me feel like I was a mouse in size to him, was correlated to the Arcturians that came here eons of time before we humans had been created. And at that point, it seemed like a flooding amount of information came into my mind that they had been there and building all those great big walls and things that most of us could not even contemplate how they could make walls that were sealed so closely with edges, so close like this. We can't even cut them today to make them fit exactly through all the little lumps and bumps and things. And during that time, I made an association that when I was knitting and making things, which I did a lot of, that in my mind I came to understand the Arcturians were making sure that a quantum amount of us people who are down on this earth were going to be leaders and be creators and be people who would go out into the world and teach people to be happy. And that's the way I understood it. And I got to admit I wasn't happy, because as a child with 2 post-traumatic stress disorder parents, and myself also not knowing that I was, having been in London throughout the war from 42 until it ended, being bombed every night, you can imagine what it was like. And I can actually remember at 2.5 years old these celebrations going on, which I wrote about in my book, My Life Story Again, so I'm not talking about that now. But what I want you to understand is that was a door opening to my conscious mind. Now, the second person that came into my life to open up my mind a bit further was my grandpa. My grandpa on my father's side was a many things. He was a magistrate, he was in the First World Army, he was out in Egypt, and I've actually got a photo of him standing under the chin of the Sphinx, because the Sphinx is covered with sand at that point, with him and his men. And when my father died, I managed to get that photo, so I have it now. And I remember that my grandfather, when he saw it, was saying, when I was about 14, he was saying, that Sphinx, it's all there. It's a great big body underneath, and I know it. I doused it all around, and I went everywhere, and I can tell you that the great Cheops Pyramid and the Sphinx was underwater for over 100,000 years. I said, how do you know that? He said, oh, I know that. I douse things. And he would never admit he was psychic, but I guess I took after that side of the family because my dad was a bit too. Though he wasn't using it when I was young. He became my student later and he did use it. But so my grandpa was telling me that he had walked all around there on top of the sand, because nothing was revealed that is now there that you can see today. And he was saying, there's a whole city under this sand, and there's this and there's that, and I'm listening, and I'm like, wow, And I said, well, how do you, who did it? Who built them? And he said, oh, the Arcturians, of course. I heard that word again. The Arcturians, here it is again. So why were the Arcturians here, I asked him. He said, well, we don't know that bit. Nobody's told us that bit yet, but one day we'll find out. And he was very much a matter-of-fact person. When it came to Tutankhamun's grave, he knew Carter very well. They were discovering a grave in England on one of the walls and found 2 tiny little sort of ink pots that looked like fish bowls about this big. And there was a ring on the finger of the person. And the thing about her body was they noticed that it was strange. She had 1 finger less or something. Anyway, they each took a bowl back to their place, and each had that night terrible things happening. And as a result of it, Carter's wife said, get that thing out of the house. My grandmother said, get it away, I want it gone, it's evil. And so what happened was one went to New York and is in the New York Museum, and the other one went to the British Museum. And technically it's mine. I could go and claim it tomorrow if I wanted to, because it's a family heirloom. Grandpa didn't donate it, he put it there for safety. And I assume the other one is still in the museum in New York. So the story doesn't end there, though. According to my father, there was a ring on this finger. And he had the ring in a tin, and there was a safety pin through it to prevent it from having power. So my being a medium and well known by then, I said, I want to feel this. I want to do psychometry on this ring. My father was freaking out. No, you take that safety pin on, all the evil will happen. I said, Dad, I'm capable of handling evil. So I put it on my finger and immediately saw the destruction, a war going on in the heavens, just like we would today with, firepower. But the buildings and things around below were not being attacked. It was in the sky. Now, years later, I found out from India, and my father had mentioned something, but it didn't make sense because he was born in India. I found out that the records there in India, and I was reading them, said about the war in the skies. So I'm putting bits and pieces together, as it were. And so I'm also asking my spirit guides. Now, around that time, I'm also getting more connections with the larger greys, who are about 4'6". In fact, again, there are many stories where I've talked about it in my book, My Journey into the Oneness. But the reason I'm mentioning it here is I want people to understand that the greys are not violent. They're quite the opposite. What they do is they're telepathic. So what they do is they take us and they test us very young at children, and they follow families throughout generations, generation after generation, watching the evolution of mankind. And so they had me and put me through various tests and read in the book. And then when I found out that I'd reached my pitch of exhaustion or whatever I was going through at that time, the room cleared and there was no spiders or whatever it was. I was seeing snakes and things. And then I knew I was being tested. Well, as a result of being tested, what they were looking for were children who were going to grow up to be adults, who could be teachers, not to us in the world, but to the half-caste alien/human beings. And yes, I was given a baby, and yes, I reared her over time when they would come and get me and have me teach her. And there were many times I went. Sometimes I was allowed to remember, sometimes I wasn't. In my particular group, there was about 14 girls and boys together. I don't remember if I was counting them 6 for 6 or 10 for 4 or whatever, but there was about that number. And my job was to bring out the humanism in them, to be able to talk their language and they to talk mine. And the thing about them is, that was really marvelous, is their intelligence was so high that they could master many languages. But their language was not anything that you could compare. I couldn't say, in our British English, talking that way, I am going to the store, noun, to buy some sugar, and while I'm walking, verb, and so on, and describe. I couldn't tell you that. All I know is that I was given the gift of speaking their language, and I can still do it even now. I will give you a demonstration. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to think what I want to say. I just do it. That sounds really ridiculous, doesn't it? But what I've actually said is everything I'm telling you is the truth, and there are many of them who will tell you the same because they've had the same experiences as I had, and they too will be able to talk in that guttural way. That was a mixture of actually the small greys and the large greys. So there's different, just like we have different languages, here on our planet, they have different languages too. So that was how they communicate to one another. I won't go into all of them now because it's not necessary. But I want you to understand that we have never been alone and will never be alone. And we are a garden under which we are watched and observed to see our evolution. And this evolution is very important to them because they need to know how to train their half-breeds, as I'm using that word now, because I don't want to say they're half grey or they're half this. They name them. They give them names. They put them on different planets. My child is now on another planet. She is head of a whole group of people, and she has had 2 children, so they tell me, that are my eggs. So basically I've got 2 children on another planet and 1 more that was due, so there's 3 now, I suppose. But they're populating this planet, and where is it? It's on the other side of our sun. So we're going round, they're going round like this, and we can never see them. We will never see them. And what I learned in understanding that is that there are other planets going around our sun that we will never see because we're all going around at different times. And so we never catch up with one another. So until the sun dies, we've got plenty of life going on other planets around us. So we don't really need to get in a spaceship and go out beyond Mars and further out and so on. Because if we do slingshots, which they're talking about, that might be interesting if they find some of these planets that I'm talking about. So, okay, now you understand that the greys are generators. They're regenerating the energy. They repopulate planets. They keep records of our evolution down through the DNA and the RNA. Okay, what are the Atlanteans doing? Well, they come and go sometimes because they're the builders. They generate energy in our minds to create more things. So most of the people of that period in time are spirit guides, guardian angels, people who come to us and spark an idea, and suddenly we're the all-knowing person. And von Daniken was one of these people who was stimulated to question the existence, and look what happened. He opened up a whole world with everyone, and today is highly revered for all his work and everything he's done in bringing to our consciousness that aliens have contacted us by drawing pictographs, lines and things in remote deserts where they won't be spoiled, so that we could all fly over there one day and see it, because you can't see it from the ground. So that was a big clue, you see, to understand that aliens had been here before, flying around our planet, and had seen everything. So let me come forward now into, there are many ancient alien believers. There are many people who know they've been an ancient alien. Well, I want to collect that and say we all have been an ancient alien. So we have different forms and different memories and different associations. But for our time now, on this planet, we are humans learning to love one another. And this is a very big step for us, to honor, respect. Now, it's 2,000 years since Jesus was here. And it's 2,000 years later, as it were, that we, the psychics, the healers, the people who channel, are bringing that message back to the world to love one another. And when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, he didn't mean, okay, you've hit that side, come and hit that side. He meant, show them a different face. So let's say I'm being angry and then someone gets upset. I actually, in that moment, would turn the other face and be a nice person and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. This is what I meant. I'll say it in a different way so that you can understand it. And then perhaps we'll become friends, at least through communications. And with communications, we will be wiser and move forward into this world to find unconditional love. So, once again, everyone, thank you for listening to me. I've been giving you a general talk under my show, The Truth. Please tune in again. I'll have more to tell you next time. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.